Hello, everybody. I hope you enjoyed today's programs, and it's good to see you all here tonight. My name is Gün Semin, and I, with Walter Michel, chair the steering committee of the ICPS, and I have the distinct honor tonight to introduce our speaker. Atsushi Iriki has drawn worldwide attention for his pioneering studies on tool use, body image, and higher order representations in humans and primates. Atsushi explores the developmental and evolutionary processes surrounding communications, intellect, and altruism using behavior and neurobiology techniques. He was one of the first scientists to train monkeys to use tools in a laboratory setting. This led him to discover that monkeys can learn to generate vocalizations for specific tools. And he discovered that this training was associated with changes in cortical structures. He serves as a model of integrative research at its finest, collaborating with researchers in such fields as genomics, preventive medicine, physiology, and anthropology, as well as archaeology. Atsushi's work with macaque monkeys and marmosets has uncovered new information about evolutionary and developmental processes, including dexterity and the neural processes of social information. He received his PhD in neuroscience from Tokyo Medical and Dental University in 1986. After serving in research associate positions at the Tokyo Medical and Dental University, he went to the Rockefeller University, where he joined the faculty, after which he joined the faculty of Toho University Medical School, and in 1991, and in 1999, he returned to Tokyo Medical and Dental University as a full professor and chairman in cognitive neurobiology. He has been the head of the Laboratory for Symbolic Cognitive Development at RIKEN Brain Science Institute. Since 2004, he's a research professor at Kyoto University, an adjunct professor at Keio University Global Research Center of Logic and Sensibility, and visiting professor at University College London and at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. He has been honored with numerous awards, including the Minerva Foundation's Golden Brain Award. His work is advancing our understanding of the evolution of human intelligence and technology, and it's a great honor to present to you Atsushi Iriki.
Well, thank you very much, Gyun, for a nice introduction. I'm very much flattered. So today, I would like to share with you the work on, this is the title of my talk announced in the program. And through the conversation with Gyun last night, I added some additional flavor to my talk, which is the phased transitions of biological brain evolution that gifted us, the humanities, including psychology, and also something beyond. And I would like to share with you and think together with you how our human brain acquired through some changes in the mechanism behind it. Go directly into the topic. This slide, this graph, inspired me a lot. This is the size of the brain in archaeological human ancestors, extrapolating from the New World, Old World monkeys and chimpanzees. And this is millions of years ago from now. And this plot is extant chimpanzees, which is along the extrapolation of this line. But something happened here. After this, the human brain expansion skyrocketed, accelerated a lot. So there must be some, so the human brain expansion is too rapid, and something should have happened around here. I call this a phased transition of the mechanism behind the human brain evolution. And what have happened there? There's many theories about it, but typically, the human ancestors started using tools. This is an Oldvan artifact, which is the oldest stone tools in the history. And then this is an Assyrian artifact, And each of the kind of the tools have formed a culture. And there's the theory that to transfer the technology and method to make these tools, we need kind of precursor of languages. And then reach to the Neanderthal, which is a sapiens, kind of sapiens, which is similar to our Homo sapiens sapiens, which are us. And the brain expanded to this level. And there must be some co-evolution of tool use and language faculties. And probably our assumption was that epigenetic or cultural inheritance of wisdom, of the knowledge about making tools and communicate with each other, have accelerated these expansion processes. And in my talk, I use epigenetics as in a broad sense than just molecular mechanisms. The culture, way of growth, and environment, which contains the information about the brain function, is all included in the epigenetic factors. So here, probably this is the second phase transition I'm going to talk today. I'm going to talk about the first and third one later, but second phase transition happened here. And what was it? Was the first question. Since I brought up with the tool use and language, as an experimenter, I tried to come up with an experimental paradigm that can train non-human primates. And training the non-human primates with speaking is a little bit challenging. So I thought it's easier to train them with using tools. And the reason behind it is that I think it's not necessary to explain to this audience, but language and tool use shares the common core functions, core structure of the brain. And the difference is that they are input and output channels. In the language, we hear, the input is hearing, and then through these core structures, we vocalize, we speak out. But tool use, we see and feel and process in the core structure and output through mostly by our hands in the motor output. But this structure is in common. So that's why probably the tool use and language have co-evolved together. And in this way, I thought some core mechanism here can be studied by using tools. And Gyun have kindly introduced me that I have successful in training the Japanese macaque about 30 years ago. And this is start of my series of my talk today. And this is Japanese macaque who usually not use a tool or video in the forest, but can be trained in rather short period of time. He's using rake to collect the food and not directly seeing it, but this small camera, it's 30 years ago, this was the smallest camera at that time, and then projected onto the LCD's monitor. This is the world's first commercial liquid crystal TV. But anyway, if you look from the back, it looks like this. Monkeys, as if playing the video game. And if you superimpose some spot there, monkeys must be thinking there's something there and trying to take it, although they cannot take it. So this means, probably I thought this monkey is projecting their self-image in the monitor. And in this way, we can study the neural correlate of their introspection, the body image or body schema, whatever you call. And where to look at in the brain is obviously the parietal cortex, where somatic sensory and visual information merges and form the body's images. I think, again, I don't think it's necessary to explain to this audience. But we recorded in the parietal cortex neurons that have bimodal properties, which integrate somatic sensory or tactile sensation and visual sensation, and integrate around the hand. And this is, I call it a visual receptive field, scanned by the space, and then detected the area in the space that this neuron fires when the monkey sees those probes in space. And obviously, the tactile receptive field was explored by palpation. And this neuron responds both to the visual and tactile stimulation. And by using tools, this receptive field extends along the tools, meaning that the tool is incorporated into your body schema or body image, or alternatively, your body image is extended toward the tools. And if you use the video monitor, these receptive fields was formed in the monitor, probably meaning that his introspection projecting his body image in the monitor is coded by these parietal neurons. And there's a series of these studies. And I reasoned that to correspond to roughly to the archaeological evolution of the human stone tools. I don't get into the detail of that because of the interest of time. But after the monkeys are trained to use a single tool, they automatically learn how to combine the tools, the long tool and short tools. And I think it is obvious from just seeing the video. He cannot reach the far space, but he takes the long tool by the short tool and take the food. And this is kind of a contextual structure that monkey can automatically come up with. It's like a language syntax. So these are the trajectories of how the monkey acquires the skills and how those are represented in the brain neural patterns. And these trainings, I thought at the beginning was difficult, but it turned out to be not that difficult. Can be acquired in like 10 days or 2 weeks or so. But it still needs 10 days or 2 weeks, meaning that something materialistic or molecular mechanisms must be induced or happening in their brain. And then first thing I tried was to explore the genetic expressions in this parietal brain area and found that something is actually happening. This is a very early stage of my study, explored that this immediate early gene have been overexpressed during the training, only during the training period, and only at the brain area that we discovered this bimodal neuron that codes the image of the tool to incorporate into hand. And after this genetic expression, we also found that there, by combining retrograde and anterograde tracer techniques, the intracortical connection that connects this temporoparietal junction area and this parietal cortex extends and makes a new connection in the intercortical connection in this parietal cortex. So this is the kind of the plasticity of the microcircuitry in the brain that can be induced by training or induced by the exposure to the environment that necessitates the tool use. So monkeys' brains are more flexible than it was thought. And this is a schematic diagram to explain what I have now said, is that this is very much simplified dimension of the human intelligence or human higher cognitive function. I know that this is too much simplified for you psychologist, but forgive me, this is just for graphical reasons. So this shows that this also corresponds to the developmental pattern of internal representation of the things, starting from enactive representation to visual to symbolic representation, and also correspond to the kind of the behavior that we can use from skillful movement, tool use, and language, and maybe to the philosophy. And then here is a spectrum of the ability of the different primate, which is humans and macaque monkeys, is that at the human, N stands for the normal humans. When humans are born at this level, and through the development and education, some of the human can become philosopher. I know that there are many philosophers here, there's at a higher stage here. And on the contrast, the monkey, in the normal monkey in the wild, are born at this level, and through the development, they develop, but stop at this level, not even using a tool normally, because they don't need it. But by artificial training, we can expand this spectrum to make an overlap between human intelligence, like using tools or symbol manipulation, maybe, or language, I don't know, but anyway, there can be induced overlap of the human intelligence and monkey intelligence. And in this way, this provides the platform to study the biology of the humanities, which was impossible before, but this manipulated non-human primate brain, we can mimic the part of or elements fragmental bits of elements of the human intelligence and study the biology behind it. I'm not saying that we can make a monkey a human, because of the capacity, we cannot introduce all of the human elements, all elements of the human intelligence into monkeys. Then it becomes humans. But at least a part of it can be introduced, implemented in the monkey brain. And by structuring that, we can study the biological basis of the humanities. So this is the structure we are using. And probably the tool used might be the one of maybe many, but very powerful way to expand this capacity. So this was conclusion at this point, about 20 years ago, that I'd reached. And then my work expanded further to that. So I have been talking about the tool held by hand to extend our body image. So this is externalization of our motor apparatus. And this is almost the definition of the tools that held by hand, external object, and interact with the environment. But if we think about the kind of the tools we are using, there are many other kinds of tools that extend ability of our sensory apparatus, like endoscope or binocular or telescope, that accelerates, helps us more, increase the sensation and increase the sensitivity of our apparatus. And by the success of using rake in the monkeys, I thought I can train the monkey to use the binocular and the endoscope relatively easily. But it was not the case. I started to train the monkey with using endoscope. It didn't work for 5 years or so. And then I came up with the idea that there must be the structure in the kind of tools we're using, considering the developmental pattern or evolutionary pattern. The motor tool first, and then in addition to that, there's a sensory, like an enactive representation, iconic representation, and symbolic representation. So what I did at this time is that this is a motor rake, and attach a mirror at the tip of the rake, which is that into the monkeys already acquired to manipulate their body image, attach a sensory cue at the tip. And what the monkey can do is explore with a mirror and then take the food. So this is not exactly the extended sensory organ, but it's kind of some sensory cue attached in addition to the already acquired motor tools. And then there are several steps to that, but finally, we could train the monkey to use endoscope. And this is a small camera attached to the rake, and this is a scenery that the monkey is seeing, and this is the view from the front. And it's like a It's like a physician's using the gastro camera, the endoscope, to peek into your stomach. So this is as if you're grabbing your eyeball and stick at the tip of the tools and explore where you cannot see it. And then question is that, what happens when you see yourself by your own eyes? That gives you a kind of the third person's perspective of yourself, or meta-self recognition, which is unusual for monkeys, and it's also difficult for yourself. To acquire your meta-self recognition or self-control, you need kind of a spiritual training. It's not so easy, but it can be done. And what happens if you acquire the sense of the meta-self is that you might have the sense that your self continues from past, present to the future. That existence or the continuation of your core self. And if you acquire that, you might start thinking that you have some useful information now, want to store it and use it later. So this is an externalization in your brain. So there must be some hierarchical structure of the tools and the intelligence in the motor, sensory, and symbolic ways. And now we are starting using external memory devices, probably derived from writing or pictures, drawing, and now using external thinking devices, which is computers. And this is happening right now. And towards the end of my talk, I touch a little bit upon what is happening in AI. AI is another dimension of expansion or of our brain capacity. So there must be the structure like this. And I have said that if we acquire the sense of the meta-self-recognition, we start thinking about thinking for the future. And this gives us the transition of the evolutionary theory from natural selection to the niche construction. Probably you know about the niche construction. It's derived originally from Darwin's original idea. It's like beavers. Beavers are the mountain animals, but they happen to acquire the aqueous environment. And that's what creates their own new noble niche. And beavers monopolize that niche, and then they're happy with it. And that's a construction of the living niches, modify the environment. And humans are doing this all the time. This buildings and cars and roads, these are kind of the niche construction. But what is different between humans and non-human animals about niche construction is that beavers are satisfied by the first constructed niches. They don't think about improving or making the larger or more comfortable niches. But humans, since having the self-awareness toward the future, it's our tendency to constantly thinking about improvement and make a more better and better environment. So there's a loop of this niche construction, embedding the noble tool into the environment, and that's further keep improving. This is kind of the intentional positive feedback between construction of the niches. And this I called the ecological niche construction, and result is the Anthropocene, which the era, geological era, that we are modifying our Earth environment. And this is the environment that humans have quickly started improving after using tools. And the question is that the brain is the general information processing machine to select and choose adaptive behavior to adapt to the environment. So if the environment changes, the brain is flexible enough to adapt to it. So what happens is that when the monkeys are exposed to the environment that's necessary to use tools, or by artificially trained to use tools, we found about a few years ago, like that through the voxel-based morphometry, that part of the parietal cortex and among some other areas actually expands in only 2 weeks of training. And by the MR intensity, it expanded by 23% in only 2 weeks in single monkeys. So this is kind of the expansion of the brain. Mostly happens around this parietal area. And I metaphorically call it neural niche construction, because activity of the monkeys adapting to the new environment create the new resources of the brain tissues. So it's like a niche construction. So this is the second kind of the niches that constructed through the interaction between environment and also the primate brain. And what is happening? What are these expanded areas carrying is the third niches. And I come back to this later, but this is a meta-analysis I did about 10 years ago, plotting the non-spatial processing, like a social or perceptual temporal information, and where in the brain are these information coded. And these are also assigned mostly in humans in this parietal area, and some of them are plotted in monkey parietal area. And I called it the cognitive niche constructions, because through the expanded brain, they can carry the novel kind of the cognitive functions, including language, mathematics, and symbolic manipulation, and so on. And this is a kind of the cognitive niche construction. And just to summarize, what is the parietal cortex all about is that this is a monkey parietal cortex, and this is human. And this sulci was rather expanded for visualize it. But these parietal cortex, as all of you know, is surrounded by these primary sensory areas, and same as the humans. And what are these parietal cortices doing is essentially handling creating the movement of various body parts. There are many body parts, but it's not so many kinds of the body parts. The body parts that we can move is eye, or hand, or head, or the whole body by locomotion. And monkey parietal cortex is occupied by these areas, coding the dimension transformation and so on. Probably you know all about it. And you can plot the same thing in humans, like this, but there are many areas in between it. So these are probably the constructed neural niche during the evolution. And this area originally was handling the spatial information processing, but these areas start handling the non-spatial information, but in the form of the information processing of the space, like perceptual space, temporal space, social space, and even the conceptual space. If you think about any language, any culture in the world, if you think logically, you always use a metaphor of the space, like bridging an idea, there's some secret behind it, or basis of something, or building something on top of it. It's all about the space. And we are good at handling the spaces and use the same principle to adapt to the new cognitive niches. And thereby, we can create the languages and mathematics and logics and so on. So this is the cognitive niche construction. So in this way, evolution theory changes from natural selection to intentional niche construction. And now I call it triadic niche construction, which is the interactions among ecological niches, which is original concept of niches, and cognitive niche and neural niche interact with each other and gradually have formed a positive feedback to expand it larger and larger and larger and more effective. And what is good about it is that in the cognitive niches, it's usually a culture or humanity thing. And in this way, we can ground it onto the biological reality. And this provides a clue for studying the biology of the humanities. And this also provides the evolutionary theory. But maybe you think that this is just the plasticity of the individual brain among their lifetime. How can it be carried on to the next generations? Otherwise, it cannot be the evolutionary mechanisms. But think about evolutionary mechanisms. There are many extragenomic, epigenetic, or evo-devo mechanisms that we were not aware of so far. And the evolution theory also evolves. Probably if we think about evolution theory, many of us, probably all of us, start thinking from Darwin's origin of the species, which is a kind of hypothesis proposed only 150 years ago. And in Darwin's origin of the species, they're composed of only three concepts, which is variation, inheritance, and natural selections. And Darwin's idea of the natural selection was almost extinguished when more quantitative mechanisms, discontinuous mechanisms of the DNA and so on was found. Because premise for this was the variation is continuous and give rise to the millions of offsprings. And among the variation that's adapted to the new environment will be selected. But if it's carried on discretely by the non-continuous information, they cannot stand. And then what happened is the genius of the Julian Huxley that started neo-Darwinism or modern synthesis. And this introduced the genetic mechanisms, other mechanisms that we now accept as evolutionary theory, which is a combination of the mutation and natural selections. But this is only 70 years or 2 generations after the first hypothesis. And now we are entering about a time 70 years after this. This is about the time to incorporate novel concept, which is a niche construction, epigenetic inheritance, and there's many other concepts that can be incorporated into evolution mechanism. It's named as extended synthesis. And here we can think about other mechanisms that the genetic information or carried on to the next generation can be carried by extragenomic information processing. And in this way, probably the information was embedded in the environment. This way, we talked about this scheme, and what we found is that through this expansion of the platform of spectrum, there's many interesting features. I don't get into touch on it today because of the interest of time, and that makes the non-human primate brain close to the human brain. And what I didn't touch before in this scheme is this spectrum. This stands for wild humans. For biologists, it is not fair to compare wild non-human primate with educated and civilized humans. We have to compare with wild human brain as a biological mechanism behind it. But from the definition, there's no such humans as wild humans. And what is different about human is that we have social or cultural pressure. We teach each other without training by others. We can train each other in society. And that can trigger this expansion of the human spectrum. And this can be the epigenetic inheritance of the wisdom and give rise to the human mind. And to do that, so this kind of the evolutional hypothesis is very difficult to study in the laboratory because the generation time of the primates are very longer, much longer than the insects or the mice or so on. But we want to study that empirically. And the way to do that, I thought about it for a while and thought that we might go into the nature and see the wild non-human primate and compare the primate evolved, a similar primate evolved in a different environment, and what happens to the brain. And this is the work is just started out, so I cannot give you the conclusion, but what I'm trying, and the specimens I have found is the macaque monkeys in Indian Ocean. I went there several times, and these are Burmese long-tailed macaques, Macaque fascicularis, and they use tools. The normal macaque don't use tools, but this, in isolated island, there's a group of monkeys come to the shore and crack the oysters with the stones. And they seem to learn from each other. There's small kids watching the others, and they just use tools. And the same species in the continent never use tools. The reason, there's many reasons behind it. Because of the oysters, the high nutrition, the population density is like 10 times higher than in the mainland. So there are social interactions, and there's no predator, so there's lots of time to think and play, and there's many materials to use as the tools. The tidal difference from here to here in this area is like 4 meters. They washes out oysters every day and grow the new oysters. And with these conditions, their new traits have emerged. And probably what they are eating are seafoods. And in the continent, the monkeys tend to eat fruits. So their eating materials are different. And that probably induces difference in their gut microbiome. And through the gut-brain axis, they can manipulate or modify the development pattern. This is just a hypothesis. We don't have a data yet. But I think there's a good reason to assume that this can affect onto the differences in the brain developmental pattern. And if you think about the amount of the genomes carried by microbiome, it's much more than in our body microbiome. And in the human archaeological history, that can be altered by diet and cooking fires, and more recently, the many other components. And this might have accelerated, have playing a role in acceleration of the brain expansion for past few hundreds of thousand years. It's much less than a million years. So this is just a hypothesis, but I think it's a good reason to study this. So far, I have been introducing my idea of triadic niche construction from the monkey triadic niches to, by interactions, it becomes larger and larger and becomes human niches. And the mechanism behind it, I just proposing, is that not just the combination of mutation and natural selection, but it's something more than that. It's usually, as I told you before, the neo-Darwinism assumes that mutation is accidental or probabilistic and accidentally meet the changes environment, and they just shift to the new environment like this. This is very simplified scheme, assuming this white bar is the kind of environment, and this shadow is where it is expressed, and this is the genetic sequences of the one species. And if the environment changes and the new sequence is, the animals with new sequence is selected. But if we assume this epigenetic factors in between, we can assume in this way. If the environmental changes within the existing sequences, within the range of its plasticities, the expression pattern can change by training or adaptation or by individual efforts. And this is plasticity within one generation. But if it's become repeated, it can become automatically shifted by epigenetic factors. Like there can be many factors that we can think about. The information embedded in the environment, like the social factors, the food, there's many factors that we can think about. And then, through the epigenetic mechanism, if the expression pattern is shifted this way, and then we can assume that mutation happens accidentally or probabilistically, and then the direction of the mutation, which is selected by this shift, have bias toward this way. And so in this way, genetic mutation can follow the plasticity within the individual ranges. So this is called Baldwin effect. So in this way, we can assume the mechanism that evolution can be driven intentionally, or I must not say intentionally, but some kind of directions or bias toward a certain way through the combination of environmental and brain mechanisms. So probably this kind of thing have happened through maybe the gut-brain axis and through the tool use and tool making processes of the human ancestors. And this became the second phase transition of the human intelligence evolution. Then the next thing is, what is the first and third phase transitions are? The first phase transition I would like to propose is the primate brain. The humans are primates, and this is different from other mammalian orders. And if you think about the primate brain designing principle, you can find it's very different from other mammals. So this is an evolutionary tree of the mammalian order from now to past 200 million years ago. And there are three primate orders. Those are very much successful, which is primates and rodents and its bats. These numbers are the numbers of the species in respective orders. And if you think about the primates and rodents and the bats, their brain is designed very differently to use different modality of the sensation to adapt to the world. The primate is good at vision, and rodents are good at tactile sensation, and bats are good at audition, hearing. So their brain design must be very different from each other. And how is it different? If you think about, compare the closest mammalian order to primates are rodents. And if you compare, this animal, this is called capybara. This is like a big rat living in South America. And this is a small monkey, this is a squirrel monkey, and they live in the same environment. And capybara brain is much bigger than squirrel monkey brain. But if you compare the structure of this rodent and primate brain, there are striking differences. So these colored areas are primary sensory areas. Red is somatosensory, blue is vision, and yellow is audition. And capybara brain is much bigger than marmosets and somewhat comparable to macaques. But if you look at this structure in principle, the big rodent brain is just analogous expansion of the small rodent brain. But the big primate brain, there's an increase in size of the primary cortices, but much more increase in white area, which is association cortex. So in this way, in rodent brain, if it becomes bigger, it just explodes. But in the primate brain, there's a continuous additions of the new areas and new numbers of neurons that can carry the new cognitive or neural niches, new functional areas. And so in this way, in the physical functions, we can use the mice or rodents as a model of the human or mammalian brain. But if you think about the mental function, humans are primate brain, and it's indeed it is a mammalian brain, but it's quite different. So mental function, like a wisdom in humanities, is different from rodent brain. And if you compare the number of the neurons in these different size of the brains, and this is a capybara, and this is somewhat similar in, I think this is macaques, monkeys. And brain is somewhat in the same order, but the number of neurons are strikingly different. And if you think about the bigger primate brain, the number of neurons dramatically increases. But compared with the elephant brain, it's like more than twice as big as human brain, but the number of neurons are much lesser than human brain. So primate brains are very special among the mammalian order, that if it expands or becomes bigger, it creates the new functions. And this is, I thought, is a first phase transition to enable the primate brain to become the self-evolving, rapidly self-evolving machine, different from other mammalian order. And having this primate brain combined with a triadic niche construction, our evolutionary mechanism become accelerated and became more intelligent and bigger and bigger. And here, we have to think that this triadic niche construction is all assumed depends on the growth. If it's interact, it becomes bigger and exploit the resources of the nature. And it was good enough when we can consider the nature as infinite resources until recently. But we are now recognizing that we are hitting the limit of the growth for a few decades from now. But since we have a constraint, we have a primate brain, we cannot assume the mechanism without growth. All the political and economic and social system are dependent on the growth. But we cannot escape from that, having the primate brain. What can we do? This is from the rest of the time, I want to advance some speculation by extrapolating my work, is that since I proposed a triadic niche construction, and so far the mechanisms is growth, the physical growth, exploiting the natural resources and physical resources. But it doesn't necessarily limit it to the physical resources. since this is a niche construction, we can create a new niche. And that can be the dimension expansion of the symbolic space. Like we can go for more quality, more sophistication, more happiness, comfortable. There's many rooms that we can exploit and seek for the growth without hitting the limit of the physical limit, ceiling of the resources. And to allow us with this dimension expansion of symbolic space, probably the third phase transition would be introduction of AI, artificial intelligence. This is a kind of our externalized brain and expand our brain capacity by the aid of the computers and new technologies. And what happens, we don't know yet, but we can guess or extrapolate from our mechanism that we have known so far. So the idea is that on the first phase transition, acquired primate brain, through the triadic niche construction, we are reaching here. And what is the next phase transition? Probably is AI, and that's start unifying the architecture of the triadic niches, combining it. And let me just advance some speculation, which way we should go or which way it will go. And this is very much simplified abstract diagram. What happened so far from animals, vertebrates, primates, hominids, sapiens, and this is the size of the brain in very abstract way. And we have talked about two phase transitions. And we talked about the use of tools and also the languages. And when the animal's brain or neural machinery become somewhat big enough, animals start producing kind of proto-language or communications. It's different from human language, but it can carry some sort of a culture among animals. And after the primates or hominids acquire triadic niche construction, the mechanism of the biological evolution has shifted, and this is second niche construction, and exceeded some limit and acquired human languages. It's like a tool using syntax. And this is the basis of the humanities. And now we are facing to the third phase transition, and probably accelerates, like what happened here, our brain capacity. This is just a speculation for the future. And then what can happen is I spend another 10 minutes or so to think about advanced speculation about what is our humans and what kind of the biological basis behind it can be considered. So this is very much simplified diagram proposed by Ernst Cassirer, which is a German philosopher. I took this diagram, I actually drew this diagram from his book called Essay on Man, and defining what is humans and what humans are different from animals. And according to Ernst Cassirer, he says that in the animal world, they live only in the sensory system and response system, which is sensory and motor system. And that's about automatic linkages to survive in the given environment. And according to Cassirer, what is special about humans are that we have symbolic system, which can handle the languages and humanities and so on. But also, it's true that this is handled by our brain. But we cannot record, we can record the neural activity here, but there's nothing to correlate with it. If it's in the animal world, in the sensory system, we can poke the electrode into the sensory cortex or sensory systems and correlate with the sensory, physical parameters of the external world. In the motor system, we can correlate the neural responses with motor output, and we can measure it. But it's difficult to measure the symbolic like a value or beauty or love to correlate with the neural activity, but we have it. So this is in the materialistic environment, and humans live, in addition to the materialistic environment, information environment. And the guiding neural mechanism to guide in this artificial, in the materialistic environment, we call it emotion. If some stimuli appear in the environment, if that stimuli is useful for your survival, like a nutrition or the food, we just approach it. It's called approach responses. And if it's some enemies or toxins, we escape from that. And we label those emotional reaction emotion by human consciousness. And in the symbolic world, we have other rules to guide it. And from our experiment, the tool used can somehow raise this boundary to include animals, higher cognitive functions. And the question is that what happens when the brain function is expanded by artificial intelligence? With a few more slides, I'll advance the speculation for this. In the emotional system, if there's an environmental stimuli, we know very well about the emotional circuitry and select the emotional reactions. And for guiding principle behind this, to select what kind of reaction is appropriate for that stimuli, is controlled by physical environment or physical rules. And we don't need any other abstract rules to guide it, because it's selected by natural environment. And this is a primary emotion. And with a secondary emotion, we have a social stimuli, and still uses the similar machinery and to produce the social reactions. But these reactions are not constrained by the physical rules of the environment. And this is why we need the cerebral cortex to think about the guiding principle in the symbolic information, which is called value or meaning or moral or ethics or norms. And this is the range of the humanities. But since we are using the established based on the biological system, there are some links between it. And question here is that this depends on the expansion of the neural system. And I talked so far about the rapid expansion of the primate, but we can extrapolate it from much longer range of the biological evolution. And think about what is the nervous system all about originally. If you think about a somatic nervous system, I'm not talking about autonomic nervous system here. For animals in any kind of environment need to sense the information of the external world and select the behavior or the output, like an emotional reaction. It exists from the protozoa. In the protozoa, it happens in one cell. There are sensory proteins and motor proteins to move the hairs and so on. And this can be done in a single cell. But by the evolution, when the body becomes bigger, and after Cambrian explosion, most of the animals have a symmetrical body design, and the movement direction is restricted along the body axis. And then the sensory apparatus accumulated on the top, on the front of the body of the movement. And then motor apparatus become centered around the center of the gravity of the body, because it's most effective. And this becomes a distance between it. And here we need the origin of the nervous system to carry the information from sensory to motor organs. And when the brain becomes bigger, can be centralized, and in the primates can create more higher centers. And this structure very much resembles the Casillas diagram like this. And we are in the middle of the way of the expansion of the neural information processing principle. And the question here is what happens when it's expanded further by the artificial intelligence after the third phase transition. And we have talked about this. And what if become more expanded by artificial intelligence? This is just a thought experiment, that there can be the border, and what is the governing principle behind it? It can be AI ethics or other values or so on. We don't know yet. But what we know is that with this artificial intelligence, the expansion of our biological brain, that can connect to the environment through the AI and IoT, Internet of Things. Then it becomes, again, directly linked with the physical and material environment, similar to this one. So our brain, in the next phase, after the next phase transition, will be embedded again closely into the environment. This is just a speculation, but then what happens here, coming back to this, I think this is the last slide, is that from this diagram, from third phase transition, we are biological organisms. So basically, we are governed by biological principles. But by rapid expansion of the brain, we created a language and humanity things. And this can be grounded onto the biological reality through this mechanism of triadic niche constructions. And then what happens next and beyond through the AI probably is a technology to merge, make a unified architecture of the triadic niches to fill the gap among these three niches and become a unified structure. And the study to unifying this, probably I would expect the psychologist to unify this biology and humanities and technology for the coming era. And I think I'll end my talk to express thanks to the organizers and audience and think together about phase transitions and what's the mechanism behind our evolution of intelligence and what is coming for the next few generations. And I will thank to my colleagues. Of course, I cannot do this work by all myself, but this is what I am now and what I am heading to. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Atsushi. That was fascinating, and I would like to thank you again for all this.
Thank you very much.
One more time. I think there's still, we have a set of wonderful talks tomorrow and the day after, the workshops as well. But now I invite you all to the next poster session and the reception at the exhibit hall. Thank you.
Thank you.